Let's pray. Father, thank you for the good work that you're doing in Jason and many, many other lives in this room as well. God, you are a God who's alive and still active, still changing lives. God, there's maybe some people here today that would love to see that change, to experience that change in their own life. God, maybe today's the day. Maybe today's the day they throw up the white flag. Maybe today's the day that the blinders are removed and they really, for the first time, understand what it means to follow the gospel. And so God bless us. Open up our hearts and minds. Help us to think and just be willing to receive what you have for us today. In Jesus' name, amen. I don't know if you've ever been to Yosemite. Anybody here been to, most of you been to Yosemite? Never forget the first time I went. It was in my late 20s, and I remember you enter through the gate, you know, you pay the money for the parking, all that stuff, and there's bathrooms, and I think, this is Yosemite? It's kind of nice. I mean, but then you start driving, and some of you know this. You've been on that road where you turn, and all of a sudden it opens up, and it's just like, wow. I want you to imagine for a sec thinking that when you get to the sign, and you can show that first picture, Jeanette, that you've arrived to Yosemite. And you set up camp, and you just kind of, okay, this is Yosemite. All right, let's go home. Thinking that you've been to Yosemite and missing, for example, this. Or how about this? Or even yet better, climbing Half Dome and seeing it from this perspective. Those are my shoes. Well, they were. Many times. In fact, Wilma and I are planning doing it this fall. Where's Wilma? Right, Wilma? Yes. So maybe we'll put together a group, and some of us will go up there, and some of us will climb, others can camp down at the bottom. But the reason I tell you that is because John, the Gospel of John that we're going to look at today, is kind of structured around 7 signs. John calls miracles signs. The first one was turning water into wine. The second one was a military guy's son healed. And this is the one we're going to look at today, is the third sign. And the important thing is to understand the sign is not the point. Now, miracles are very important, and I believe God still does miracles. You might be a skeptic, and that's okay. But the miracle was not the end game, if you will. They were signs to authenticate that Jesus was, in fact, who he said he was, but they were also these little moments. These moments were, in a sense, heaven kissed earth, and it was this convergence of heaven and the way life was meant to be before sin entered into the world. And so you'd have, at least temporarily, because all these people who experienced miracles, who were healed, eventually died. Their bodies decayed, and they eventually died. And so they were temporary miracles. But it is a picture of what ultimately the new kingdom will be like when there is no disease or death or destruction or any of those things. And so today we're going to look at the third sign, and it's maybe my favorite encounter that Jesus has with someone. And it's a man who has been struggling with an infirmity for 38 years. Now let that sink in for a sec. Where were you and what were you doing in 1985? Those of you who were alive. 38 years he's lived with this infirmity. Let me read it to you. It comes in John chapter 5. Sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals. So there are 3 main festivals that the Jews celebrated throughout the year. This was one of them. We don't know which one for sure. And then he says, now there was in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here, a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. One who was there had been an invalid, very interesting word, an invalid for 38 years. And when Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been there in that condition for such a long time, he asked him. And this question is really, really important, and it's very interesting. Do you want to get well? Sir, the invalid replied. Notice he doesn't answer the question. I have no one to help me get into the pool when the water is stirred. And while I am trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me." And then Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your mat, and walk." And at once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and he walked. Now, one of the reasons I love the Bible and trust the Bible is that it is the most scrutinized book in history. And most of that scrutiny comes actually from Christians, from scholars who really want to be accurate, who really want to understand the Bible clearly. So what's interesting, you may not have picked it up, but there was a verse missing as I read these first 9 verses. Verse 4 had been removed in many of the more current versions of the Bible. Let me read verse 4 to you. "From time to time, an angel of the Lord would come down and stir up the waters. The first one into the pool, after each such disturbance, would be cured of whatever disease they had." Now, during the Enlightenment, which was the 1600s and 1700s, a lot of our founding fathers as a nation were caught up in the Enlightenment movement. But one of the things they began to do was question everything, which is a good thing. They began to question the Bible. And this is during a time when the church was very corrupt in a lot of places. Many splinters were coming off the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church, and it was all in an attempt to understand the authentic, original truth of the Bible. And many scholars, especially enlightened scholars, would argue that this passage in particular proved that the Bible was inaccurate for a couple of reasons. One is that the description, the 5 colonnades and the sheep gate, that had a very Roman flavor of architecture to it, and so it could not have been authentic. This was added later. And then you look from a Christian perspective, and you realize that they went to painstaking detail to try to, they didn't have printing presses back then, and so they would copy a manuscript and then copy a manuscript, and it was a copy of a copy of a copy. And at some point, probably a couple hundred years, this description of the man saying, I can't get into the water, no one's there when the water is stirred. Well, what does he mean? Well, most scholars today think, well, there must have been a scribe who came along just to clarify and help people understand. He put a little note in the margin. See, an angel would come and stir the water, and whoever got into the water first would be healed. Now, we don't know if that's true or some legend or some superstition, but at some point, that marginal note got inserted into the story. Textual criticism and the whole process of transcribing the Bible is a fascinating study. There's books and books, and there's people who really love this. In fact, I got a friend who is a missionary in Papua New Guinea, and he's been for 30 years learning the language and taking that previously unwritten language and putting it into written form. So the very first book that these people in Papua New Guinea will get is a Bible in their own language. So, to me, that authenticates and gives me a lot of reason to trust the Bible that we read. Because not only, are Christians throughout history the most severe critics of the Bible, in the 1800s and more in the 1900s, they actually found this site that is described here by the sheep gate. In fact, here's some pictures of it. I got to go there back in November. It's kind of hard to tell, but this is what they've uncovered and believed was near the sheep gate and the pools that John is describing here in John chapter 5. We know now that this pool was 360 feet long, 130 feet wide, and 75 feet deep. And it was actually 2 pools. And it would have been a monument of wealth and prosperity. And it also probably was used for ritual cleansing. Before they went into the temple to offer sacrifices, they had to go through this ritual cleansing process, sometimes their whole body. but it was also pools that were established for water, for drinking water. It came off the mountain behind, and it would actually come into one pool and then flow over to the next pool. And so there were actually two pools that they uncovered here, and one fed the other. Here's a picture, just a drawing of what it would have been like, and it maybe explains why the water would sometimes be stirred. They thought it was an angel, but most likely it was the water moving from one pool to the other, and these air gaps and bubbles would get caught up in that, and then the water would look like it's being stirred. And what's interesting is that there was this convergence of Judaism and Roman, the Greek gods and that kind of stuff that kind of converged in this place. In fact, if you watch The Chosen, the director actually intentionally includes very Jewish aspects to the scene as well as Roman aspects to the scene. This is called syncretism. It's where you take one culture or one belief or one religion and you kind of mix it with another. We might call it a hybrid today. For example, when I was in the Philippines, Roman Catholicism dominates the Philippines, but it's very different from Roman Catholicism in Italy or America. They take some of their animistic beliefs and superstitions about ancestors and ancestral worship, and they kind of just give those names to saints in the Catholic Church. And so it's this synchronism, and I think that's what we see here in this scene. We see, in fact, there was a god that was worshipped by Romans at this time. I think his name is pronounced Asclepius. He was one of the sons of Apollo, and he was known as the god of light, the god of healing, and the god of prophecy. And notice the symbol there on this stone that has been uncovered. Some of you know where that comes from. That's a pole with a snake on it that Moses was told to hold up, and then when people looked at it, they would be healed, going way back into the Old Testament. And so, before we're too hard, though, on these ancient people, or we have this assumption that ancient people were superstitious and that these healings didn't really happen, let's bear in mind that not only are Americans consumed with what I would call self-help and you-can-do-it philosophy, Americans are also consumed with practices that include tarot cards, astrology, numerology, palm reading, mediumship, and all kinds of other stuff, especially in this county in Santa Cruz. And one of the main reasons that there tends to be a spike as you study history of these types of practices in America, they tend to spike during intense political unrest in our country. Yes. And so if you go back to the 60s, they noticed a huge spike in many of these palm readings, tarot cards, cult-like religions sprung up right after the assassinations of Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. And can you guess when there was another spike in this activity in America? Remember what was happening in 2016? Some of you don't want to go there. It's traumatic, PTSD. But whether it is in America, kind of individualism, do-it-yourself, self-help, or palm reading, tarot cards, what I am convinced of is that people are looking for a way to navigate the chaos and the uncertainties of life. And I think people deep down know that they are not well. And that there's something in us that longs to be well, to be whole, to be healed. And I've said before that when you read the scriptures, one of our challenges is to see ourselves in the story. And so as you listen to this scene, as I read it, you have Jesus, and you have this man who's called an invalid, for 38 years. And Jesus approaches him when he learns about his condition, and he asks them this question: do you want to get well? Now, I'll give you a hint. You're not Jesus in the scene. So where does that leave you? And you might not like being called an invalid. Invalid, some of the words that are synonymous with invalid are unacceptable, worthless, void. You know, when we read the Bible, we want to be the hero in the story. When we play over scenarios in our own mind, we're always the hero in the story. We always know what to say, when to say, and how to say it, and how to react. But in this story, if you're going to understand this story, you've got to see yourself as the invalid. Jesus in Luke 5 says, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have come not to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. And so Jesus asked him this question, do you want to get well? And I want you to think for a minute. If Jesus asked you this question, not if, he is. He's asking you this question right now. Do you want to get well? And this question is odd because isn't the answer obvious? You come up to a guy who's been ill and an invalid for 38 years, and you say, hey, do you want to get well? You'd think the question or the answer to that question is obvious, but maybe it's not so obvious. And his response kind of gives us some insight into why maybe this question or the answer to this question is not so obvious. You know, 38 years, you can become very comfortable in your sickness, in your unwellness. It's a long time. What would it mean for him to be well? What were the implications if he said, I want to get well, and Jesus healed him? He does heal him, but what are the implications? Think about that. For 38 years, you've had other people take care of you. You've had other people pick you up and carry you and bring you to this pool. You've had other people provide food for you, provide a place for you. For 38 years. What are the implications of getting well? Man, responsibility, get a job, work, provide. He can no longer just lay around by the pool. He can't say, I'm a victim. He can't play that card anymore. See, change is hard, even when that change is good for us and we want that change. So I want you to see in the story, Jesus basically says three things to this guy. He gives him an invitation, he gives him a command, and he gives him a warning. So what about you? How would you answer the question? And I don't want you to answer it quickly. I want you to think, maybe for a week or a month. Do you want to get well? Do you really? See, the question is, do you really want to get well? Do you understand the implications of getting well? And this is an invitation, not just to get well, but this is an invitation for this man to really think about his deepest longings and desires. What do you really want? Now, we've all thought we wanted a particular car, or we wanted a pair of shoes, or a certain clothing, or something. We've all thought we wanted certain things, and we got what we thought we wanted, and it's left us still a little bit unsatisfied. Are you worried, overly worried and anxious? Well, let me ask you, do you want to get well? Are you overly fearful and timid? Well, do you want to get well? Are you driven to succeed, whatever that means, however you define success, but yet you find yourself tired and distraught? Do you want to get well? Do the same struggles keep popping up in your life and you just can't seem to get over the hump? Do you want to get well? Would you like to see God heal your past, your emotions, your marriage, whatever it may be? Do you want to get well? Or are you, like many people, have you become jaded, cynical, and you really have a hard time trusting anything or anyone? Do you want to get well? See, Jesus asked the right question. He always asks the right question. We usually ask the wrong ones. We ask, what's going to make us happy? What's going to take away the pain? What's going to make us feel good? And those aren't necessarily bad questions or even desires, but maybe they're not the best question. We have a culture that has more wealth and comfort and conveniences than ever in world history, yet we have a culture that pops pills, smokes pot, drinks too much, shops too much, escapes through porn, Netflix, or fill in the blank. See, here's the problem with the way our culture handles so many of these deep issues that cause distress and pain and fear and anxiety. We take shortcuts to alleviate the pain, but we never deal with the root. And we short-circuit the process that God wants to put us in of really, really, truly becoming well and whole. And we sometimes, at least we risk missing what it is we truly and deeply long for. John Eldredge is, I recommend any man especially to read books by John Eldredge. I love what he has to say to men and about masculinity and about following God. But he has a book called Journey of Desire, and he says this. I'll put it up on the screen for you. Without a deep and burning desire of our own, we will be ruled by the desire of others. Think about that statement for a sec. Millions of souls drift through life without an inner compass to give them direction. They take their cues from others, and they live out scripts from someone else's life. It's a high price to pay, too high. C.S. Lewis put it this way. He, that is Jesus, paid for our sins, not to take away your desires, but to give back the desires for which you were made. Sometimes churches, unfortunately, and I'm guilty of this, I'm certain that we tend to kill desire in people, and yet the church was intended to awaken desire, especially the desires for which we were made. Now notice the man's response. But, sir, there's no one to help me. Is he complaining? Is he feeling sorry for himself? Is he blaming others? Or is he just stating the facts? Why does he not answer the question? This is, in my mind, the classic if only. What's your if only? It keeps you from really experiencing joy in life and thriving in your faith. If only I were retired, if only I were married, if only I was not married, if only I had more money, if only people understood me, if only I was more successful, if only. When I first became a Christian, I was 20 years old, and man, I was good at playing that card. I was my own worst enemy. I was a victim. But as I grew in my faith, as my journey took me forward and I got good counseling, good mentoring, good teaching, at some point I realized I had to grow up and stop playing the victim card. I had to look at what I was dealt with in life, and this is what I was given. But God is with me. But then notice what Jesus says. He just goes on and he says, he doesn't ask him again. He just says, get up, pick up your mat, and walk. Get up, pick up your mat, and walk. It's as if Jesus ignores him. But the guy listens. The guy listens. He accepts the invitation. And he gets up, and he takes up his mat, and he walks. It's interesting. There's a lot of stuff in the news lately about whether people on unemployment, food stamps, etc., receiving any kind of government benefit, as to whether they should find work or make attempts to find work. And it's really strange because we live in such an unprecedented and strange time in history where businesses cannot seem to hire enough people, and yet there are more people than ever in American history between age 25 and 50 who are unemployed, not even looking for work. There's a couple trends in the business world that are very interesting. Maybe you've heard of a couple of these. I'll just share two of them. One of them is called quiet quitting. Have you heard about this? It's kind of a trend within big companies especially, but quiet quitting is when an employee just decides to do the minimum requirements of their job. not putting in anything extra or any time or any enthusiasm into their job. They essentially quiet quit. Some people are able to not work at all for weeks at a time and yet still get a paycheck. And then there's this new thing just within the last month I've heard about. It's called Bare Minimum Monday, which is really kind of the same thing. On Monday, after the long weekend, we're going to do as little as possible. We're going to rest, recover, and then Tuesday through Friday, we'll put in the effort. But here's what we need to understand. As someone who's trying to follow Christ and obey the scriptures that God has given us, we have to understand we were designed to work. Not always have a job or get paid, but we were designed to work. It was what God commanded Adam and Eve to do in the garden at the very beginning. Take care of the garden. Before anything else, before sin entered the world. Some of you love to garden. I think you're nuts. I hate gardening. Years ago, a friend of mine gave me a book. I'll put the picture up there. It's called When Helping Hurts. When Helping Hurts. But I love the subtitle. How to Alleviate Poverty without hurting the poor or yourself. California, interestingly, has just approved $15.3 billion for the homeless. State of California, by the way, has 50% of the homeless in the country. And I'm not trying to get political here, but I feel like we need to rethink some things. Studies indicate that at least 95% of the homeless we see have a drug problem. We know mental illness is plays a huge role as well. Here's a picture. Do you guys know this picture? So I met one of the new people that work at this church. They're kind of community liaison. They try to build relationships with businesses and individuals in the community. And he used to work at a church. And so we've been chatting, and I'm planning to go down with someone at YWAM. We're going to check this place out. We're going to kind of see how they operate, how they work, and look for maybe opportunities to volunteer. Because I feel like what we're trying to do is not working. And here's the thing. Because we were designed to work, because we were designed to produce and be productive, not put our identity in that, not become workaholics, but we were designed to work. And studies over and over and over show that when we work, we build self-respect, which, by the way, is way better than self-esteem. If you're still raising kids or helping raise grandkids, help them gain self-respect. It is so much more valuable than self-esteem, whatever that means. When someone works, they contribute to society. When someone works, we experience personal growth and development. We gain financial independence. We develop a sense of purpose and meaning. We learn to overcome difficulties. We build character and grit. We also experience social connection and belonging. Now, I'm one. Years ago, my 20-year-old son was born in a government hospital. We were on food stamps and everything else. I'd been let go from a church, and then we got pregnant. And I thank God for some of those nets that help people in critical situations. But it was never intended, I don't think, to be a permanent thing. And when it becomes a permanent thing, we are actually doing people more harm than good. So I don't know, I don't have the answers to it, but I'm convinced that what we are doing is not working. See, the Jesus way is brilliant. Jesus has both compassion and love for this man, but he also tells him to get up and do something. And so he gets up, picks up his mat, and he walks for the first time in 38 years. But there were implications to being made well. The third thing and final thing that Jesus offers this man is a warning. Now, in the structure of the Gospel of John, this was a major turning point in the ministry of Jesus, because after this healing, which was done on the Sabbath, by the way, and there was a Sabbath rule, not a Sabbath law from the Bible, but a Sabbath rule made up by religious leaders that you could not pick up your mat and walk on the Sabbath. That was doing work. And so he ticked off the religious leaders, and it was at this point, after this miracle, that they began to pursue and find ways to get rid of him, to silence him, and eventually kill him. In verse 14, but this is what Jesus does next, because this guy had no idea who Jesus was. He hadn't heard or he didn't recognize him. He didn't know. He just knew some guy told him to get up, pick up his mat, and walk, and so he did, and he was healed. And he goes to the temple. And so Jesus later finds him at the temple. And this is significant for a couple of reasons. One, because he would not have been allowed to go into the temple as an invalid. Any flaws physically, you would not have been allowed to go into the temple, which represented the presence of God. So he was an outsider. He was kept from essentially a relationship with God. Maybe that's why he ended up at this pool in this kind of superstition of the water stirring. Maybe that would be his hope. And Jesus said to him, listen to these words. See, you're well again. Now stop sinning. Literally, stop doing what you were doing. What does Jesus mean by that? Was he in this condition because of some sin? And scholars debate there's 4 or 5 different options. But I have a feeling that he was trusting in superstitions. He was relying on the wrong things. We don't know what he may have done to get into this condition, but it was clear that he was not born this way. But Jesus says this, stop doing what you're doing or something worse may happen to you. And that's kind of a polite way of saying, you know, man can kill the body, but be more afraid of God who can kill the soul. Final thought. This man was not only helpless, but he doesn't even know who Jesus is, as I said, and he wasn't even looking for him. But Jesus found him. Jesus sought him out. Every religion says, save yourself. Christianity says, you can't. You're helpless. But Jesus can. And we sometimes talk about finding God, which is a little partly true, but the truth is God found us. C.S. Lewis says it this way. I love his term when he talks about the way God pursues us. And God is pursuing you always. Maybe you've been resistant, maybe arm's length, maybe just checking it out. C.S. Lewis says God is the hound of heaven. The hound of heaven. Tenacious. But you see, it's about grace. It's about Jesus inviting you into a friendship, into an encounter with him whereby your life is changed. Where you don't just see the sign and think that's it, but you actually go in and see Yosemite. And I'll tell you what, first time, I mean, it was like a worshipful experience. The awe, the wonder, the beauty of this creation. You can't help but go, wow, which is, to me is an act of worship. God, you did this. Now notice something else. Jesus invites this man to wholeness. But he still needs to get up, still needs to take up his mat and walk. And I've said this before. I need to get a t-shirt made of it. You don't get Jesus like you get a suntan. I wish we could. But when Jesus says that we are forgiven, that we could really truly unload the guilt and the shame that some of us carry. It's always there. It's the undercurrent of our heart. And when he says that we are valuable, man, I wish that we could really just accept that and believe it. We're not invalid, but we are valuable to God, so much so that he would die for us. And that when God says that we are eternal, that we would stop being fearful and afraid of what can hurt us in this life, when our life to come is secure. And that when God says that he will provide, that our souls would find rest in that. And then when he says, trust me, that we would truly stop doubting. And when he says, get up, that we would get up. After 38 years of dealing with depression, and I've shared this before, I didn't need inspiration. I needed perspiration. I sought counseling. I prayed a lot. I meditated on God's word. I went for prayer walks. I listened to podcasts that were what I needed to hear, truth. And I began to identify the lies that I was buying into. And I began to preach the truth to my own soul and to my own heart, the grace of God, over and over and over and over until I finally believed it. And I'd been a Christian for 20 years, and I'd been in ministry for about 15 years at that time. God wants to make you whole. And there are those of you who feel like the invalid for 38 years, and maybe it's physical, maybe it's emotional, maybe it's psychological. But this morning, we're going to do something different. I put here in my notes, I was uncertain what we were going to do when I came in this morning. We're going to take communion like we always do. We're not. We're going to do something a little bit differently. Instead, this morning, I'm going to invite you, if you'd like, the team's going to come up and lead us in some worship. But as they're leading us worship, I'm going to invite all of us to stand, and I've invited two couples here who are leaders here at Boulder Creek. Mike and Linda, if you would come up, and then Glenn and Julie. Mike leads our men's small group. Linda's involved with our Celebrate Recovery, and then Glenn and Julie Berry lead our Celebrate Recovery ministry on Wednesday nights. And so they're going to stand off to the side, and I've actually put some oil. James tells us that if you're sick, come to the leaders of the church. They will anoint you with oil. And it may be that God wants to heal you in some very significant and powerful way this morning. And so I'm going to invite you to come forward and let them just put a little oil on your forehead and pray over you. You don't even have to share what it is. If you want to, you can. And I know for some of you this might be difficult, uncomfortable. Get up, pick up your mat, and walk. Come forward and let these folks pray with you and pray over you. And so I'm going to invite all of us to stand. And you can come up at any time. Father, thank you. Thank you that you are a God who's still alive, a God who still heals, a God who still forgives, a God who still pursues and seeks us out. And this morning, God, please don't let the enemy disrupt this time. Please don't let the enemy distract anyone in this room for what you want to accomplish and what you want to do in this place this morning. Free us, God. Set us free from our sin, from the lies that keep us in bondage. Heal us, God. In Jesus' name, amen.